Will NBN start imposing a Netflix tax?
And should teens be banned from social media?
Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Casa Systems, taking Australian technology to the global market. Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined by what's left of the voice of Alex Kidman. Alex, can you hear me? Come through. Can you speak? Make a sound.
Not much.
Not much. Right? That doesn't leave us much to work with, so I guess it's that time. We're going to break the emergency glass, free the emergency Kidman, find his editor-in-chief, Angus Kidman. Angus, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Adam. It's a pleasure, or it will be once I get all this broken glass off me.
We're also joined once again by the man with a plan, Lee Stark from picker.com.au. Lee, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, guys. My plan is to sweep up all that glass, so let's see how we go.
So this week we're talking about the crazy idea that just perhaps NBN might put a tax on streaming services like Netflix. We're also asking if teens should be banned from social media. But first, over to the tech news. Angus, what's new in tech?
Well, Optus is back in the ACCC sights, with the competition regulator once again chasing the telco over its high-pressure tactics used to try to convince NBN customers that they had less time than they thought to switch to a new broadband plan. The ACCC says that Optus wrote to customers saying their existing NBN connections would be disconnected, but that this had no basis in fact. Optus has acknowledged the mistake and says that customers who signed up will be able to exit their contracts without any extra charges, but the ACCC is seeking penalties.
OnePlus 7 Pro smartphone owners were left wondering whether their phones had been hacked this week after the phone maker accidentally sent out cryptic messages to every handset owner, with one message reading "ha ha ha ha" in Chinese and the other just a string of gibberish in English. OnePlus says the messages were sent due to a botched internal test, although the apparent ease with which push messages can be sent to every user adds to growing concerns over fake messages, with researchers recently determining a way to send fake US presidential emergency alerts by exploiting an LTE vulnerability.
The US government is slightly softening its stance on banning Huawei gear, now saying that it's open to granting export licenses to the Chinese firm as long as they don't impact on national security. Huawei is said to be mulling what that means precisely, especially because it's US President Donald Trump that said it, but it suggests that it might reconsider reported plans to shift to its own Hongmeng OS and stay with Android for its smartphone business instead.
Australia's piracy crackdown is expanding, with Foxtel now asking the courts to force internet providers to block a handful of proxy websites which don't actually provide links to pirated content. Instead, this family of unblock proxy websites allows Australians to bypass the piracy filters, whereas previously blocked proxy and mirror sites have only focused on providing access to a single piracy site, such as the Pirate Bay. These unblocked sites act as a hub for accessing a wide range of sites where links to pirated content can be found. Foxtel argues that under the law, these sites still fall under the definition of a website that has the primary purpose and/or primary effect of infringing or of facilitating the infringement of copyright. So, Gus, Optus is at it again. What's the ACCC pulled them up on this time?
Well, it's quite similar to what they've been pulled up on before. It's the notion that you get a letter from your ISP, and we're used to this with the NBN. You get one that says, oh, well, maybe you consider switching to us, but instead it said, hey, you've got to switch because this is getting switched off in 30 days or less. That wasn't the case. People were nowhere through that 18-month period. So as a result, the ACCC said, this is clearly deceptive conduct. We're not having it. You need to be made an example of, essentially.
Yeah, and as you say, Optus has got form here. They got pulled up on doing this at the start of last year. They were telling people they only had 30 days. They changed that to 90 days after I wrote about it, and the ACCC still took them to court. But this one is interesting because there's even more of a different spin that in some ways makes it a bit more insidious. What Optus was doing last year is it was contacting Optus cable customers who were yet to move to the NBN and saying, you've got 30 days to move to the NBN with us or you're going to lose your phone number and your internet forever. Just basically scaring them into migrating to Optus before they even had a chance to think about it. My understanding of what was happening this time is that Optus was sending this to their mobile customers who had NBN with somebody else, saying that your NBN will be cut off if you don't move to us. That's even more dodgy in some ways.
Yes, and it reminds me of that dodgy behavior you often see from domain name registries, where because that's public
Yes.
information, you start getting letters. If you've ever registered a domain, you get sent stuff by everybody who's got an interest in saying, "Hey, you should renew with us." And this is sort of in that area, but a bit easier to track down because, let's face it, to sell the NBN, you still have to kind of be registered
Yeah.
and set up. It's a bit harder to hide. So hasn't gone to court yet. We'll have to see what happens on that front, but it doesn't paint a good picture of the kind of tactics that big dominant telcos will use to try and hang on to their market share.
Yeah, Lee, where do you reckon this lands on the dodgy meter?
It sounds pretty high. I mean, my dodgy meter doesn't work as well as it used to, but if I switch it on,
It's a bit dodgy.
I'm fairly sure it'll say it's more than a bit dodgy. But I always struggle with this with the sort of stuff coming out of Optus because it seems like they can't go from I guess being a fair go sort of player. We always land up with someone complaining about them. I mean, last year there were so many complaints about the company, and what was it? Alan Liu said that everyone just needs to actually treat people better. How do you go from saying something like that to just continuing on with this sort of thing? It seems like something that the company needs to change as a whole.
I think it's very core to Optus. A lot of Optus customers that I know are unhappy with the quality of the service on the NBN, just the speeds and the dropouts. I think at the very core, they've got some issues. But it's not fair just to point the finger at Optus. I know that Telstra do something that I would also rank on the dodgy meter, but perhaps not as high as this. They've got a habit of sending out NBN modems to their customers who haven't moved to the NBN and basically telling them that once you plug this in, you're an NBN customer of ours. I think that's kind of shifty. But they tell me that they've spoken to the ACCC about it and been told it's all right. I don't know, Gus, where do you reckon that sits on the dodgy scale?
It's not good consumer supportive behavior. You can probably get
Yeah.
away with it because the reality is if you've been sent that modem and didn't ask for it, you can keep it. Say to Telstra, I've got no intention of connecting it, and they have zero basis for asking for it back. The fact that Telstra has managed to use this tactic suggests that they think, oh, well, this is going to be reasonably functional. It also reminds you how cheap modems actually are. And that's why you should never, ever sign up for a contract where you're paying off your modem over 24 months because it's just not worth being locked in that way. But yeah, it's interesting that these are the big players, the ones who actually have the lion's share of the NBN market. These are not the small guys struggling to get something, but it seems once you've got that chunk of market share, interesting strategies, to put it nicely, will get used to try and hang on to that market share.
That's the thing. I think they're the ones that have got the most to lose.
Yes, because once you've had a taste of that sweet, sweet recurring monthly revenue, it's really quite hard to let go of it. So about the only way that you can make the NBN more controversial and more exciting is by throwing Netflix into the mix and saying that maybe once you've got those two together, it'll cost you even more. So Adam, what's the story here?
Yeah, this one's kind of crazy. As you say, if you're looking for a way to push people's buttons, this is it. Imply that perhaps if you want decent Netflix or to watch Netflix, you should be paying the NBN a bit more. Your net neutrality people go crazy. Your people who said, why didn't you just build the NBN properly in the first place go crazy. But NBN is saying, look, we just kind of floated this idea on a whole list of ideas. We didn't actually do it. To quote the double speak from them, we are not working towards any predefined outcomes, and the process is not about levying additional charges on customers, which is a way of saying, well, we were just spitball and don't panic. But I think people, what do you think, Gus? Is it worth panicking when they say, maybe we should do this?
I think it's worth examining the prospect and considering a carefully planned panic. I mean, what has been suggested is that they might change the underlying way that they charge ISPs and that the cash coming in would be a bit different there. We would expect that whenever that happens, we would end up getting charged more
We're going to
because
get slugged
that's what
for
we've
it,
seen
yeah.
happen in the past. So I
Yeah.
certainly think it's good to sort of raise our eyebrows, get a little bit paranoid. But I think we've got to temper that with the reality that with the NBN model we've got right now, in theory, providers can charge whatever they like. They can vary it. They can do different variant packages. Do we see that happening? No, we don't. We see plans that are exactly the same coming out of every single provider, all priced within $5 to $10 a month of each other. And even if some proposal came in like this that said, oh, we have the option now of charging differently for the video component and your plan might vary, I'd be amazed that within 6 months, that didn't mean that an identical set of plans were available from the big four providers. So until a proposal comes up and becomes real, I really don't think there's anything to panic about. And I'm not so sure that it would make a difference in the long run because the NBN's supposed to bring this competition and variety to the market. Hasn't done it so far. Not sure that this in itself would actually make any difference.
Did they give any idea on how they'd actually enforce it? Are they going to slow you to certain speeds if you don't pay, or are they going to block sites, or how would this work?
There's no concrete proposal for how it would work. The most likely model, and I'll give sort of full credit to Ray Crozier at IT News, is the one who's done all this investigation and identified these possibilities, is that actually they just say that when they're selling wholesale to the providers, there would be different traffic types. So they would be buying a certain amount of stuff that was video and a certain amount that was everything else. And how they bundled that up and sold it onto the customer would still be up to them. So they effectively put it in as a different traffic type. And then it gets into this highly complicated how you run network routing stuff,
Yeah.
which I don't think anyone understands, including many people who work at NBN Co. So we really, at the moment, it's such a spitball idea. It's really hard to work out what the impact would be. But the notion that you might have to pay more for Netflix, which in the end, Netflix and other video services are the things that we're really using this for, clearly that's enough to freak everybody out and with good justification. Um, it's worth bearing in mind there is a sort of precedent in the way that Sky Muster works, where it is limited in some way. So if you're on those satellite services, you don't get the same level of choices. But this would be quite different because it would apply across every technology, just not selected one. So just lots of question marks in there.
But
really.
that's on Sky Muster because Sky Muster's not up to it. So really, what they're saying is maybe all of the NBN's not up to it.
Well,
Now,
that's
Lee,
certainly a
like
conclusion people have drawn.
Yeah. Lee, like I said, this also leans into the net neutrality argument. How do you think that fits in the big picture of what net neutrality means and whether people should be treating all this stuff the same?
I'm actually stuck on the idea of even trying to even before the net neutrality. I mean, to me, it's the classification of how video is actually charged. It's all well and good for NBN to consider at this point. I'm probably going to evade your question. It's all well and good.
Well played, sir. You should
Sorry.
go into politics.
Thank you. I don't know how to answer that. God, that's horrifying.
Dead cat on the table.
I'm confused by the idea of classification of video services, because a lot of what we see online in general, a lot of what we grab is video related. I mean, text is large, sure, but video comes from lots of places, not just Netflix, not just Amazon and Stan, but numerous services. There are numerous types of compression technologies that pop up all along the way. So for NBN even to suggest or float the idea that video would be charged differently, it just sounds like it would just be a price for a slightly faster speed. It would just be a amended price for the 50 or 100 megabit plans that we're all already using, because video is going to come in even from YouTube or from Vimeo on other complete other places.
Ads on websites.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You cannot stop video as it is. The only way to really work with it in that way would be to actually just shape the connection, bring it back to something, terrible like 12.1. And I know that companies do that. We know companies actively shape on a regular basis. You only have to look at the 1.5 megabit ADSL style unlimited broadband that we have for 4G. I can't imagine an NBN working as a video prioritized sort of connection that you have to pay extra for, not just because there's so much video coming through, but because everything is so bloody reliant on it.
Well, it's technically actually really complicated because it's really hard now to say what is video and what is not, because the majority of this stuff is encrypted. So the packets themselves don't tell you this. Now, we can all recall there was a time when certain video services would be unmetered because they were detectable in that way. So you would have providers who said, right, you're going to get iView and it won't be metered. That's really not feasible for anything anymore because of the encryption problem. So unless you're going to go in for something known as deep packet inspection, it's never actually going to be possible to say it's video. And if you were to do that packet inspection, you're imposing a massive processing load. End result, you end up with a slower network. So hopefully this is a thought bubble that's going to burst the minute a few engineers have a prick at it, but not quite sure yet whether that's going to happen.
What you were saying about unmetering in the past was interesting, is that because, like I was saying, net neutrality is this idea that all traffic on the internet should be treated, well, not equally, because you want to prioritize things like voice, but you shouldn't say that, all right, we're going to slow down your access to this website because these people are paying us because you're not paying us enough. You shouldn't be putting roadblocks on the internet that way to slow people down. There has been the argument in the US then that that it also extends to how easy do you make it to access services. When Netflix came to Australia, they did those unmetered deals because data allowances in Australia were so damn low that if you couldn't watch Netflix unmetered, you were screwed. And then all these net neutrality people in the US jumped up and down and said, this is outrageous. Netflix shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be treating Netflix differently. You're totally missing the point of net neutrality, because they totally missed the point of how bad internet pricing was in Australia. So you really get pulled back into this quagmire. And we've seen it before. Optus talked a few years ago about charging Netflix for a higher quality service on its network. Telstra has deprioritized things like BitTorrent traffic. So it's a long and messy history whenever anyone has talked about this kind of tampering with the way the internet works.
To play devil's advocate for a second, the NBN has not been universally popular, and there's a view amongst some sectors of politics that it's a massive waste of money. And one of those arguments is, why are we paying all of this just so people can watch television that's faster? If you're able to split those costs, you're able to say, hey, we're rolling this out for the essential and valuable things. And if you want to use it for TV, you should pay. It's not a rational argument, but I look forward to seeing it in some of our mainstream media in the near future, because that's one way you could play out that discussion.
I do wish more mainstream media understood the actual absolute benefits that the NBN could provide, but it is a regular thing. It is people saying it's just there for watching TV, it's there for playing video games, and the reality is every tech journalist knows this, and quite a lot of Vertical Holds listeners would understand. There are some amazing uses for what a high speed connection can do. We just aren't really there yet. One, because our high speed connection isn't fantastic and was rolled out kind of poorly. I'm being diplomatic, and two, a lot of the use cases just aren't there yet, but they're coming, and they will rely on video. Things like the telehealth stuff will rely on video. And in that
It also relies on universal access, which is what we
Absolutely.
lost.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be almost everybody would get the same, and then we broke it up into this hodgepodge multi-technology mix, which you don't know which of your customers have got 100 megasecond and which of your customers can only get 10 megaseconds. So the business models start to break down.
When we move to this idea, if NBN is stuck on this idea of having to charge extra for things, it says a lot about the network, how it wasn't really fit for purpose when it rolled out, because it was originally supposed to be, this amazing project that, as Adam said, benefited everyone. And if it has to cost a lot more to achieve that purpose now, several years on, what are we, 10 years on roughly, then what the hell have we done?
So, Gus, Twitter is the teacup where storms happen on a regular basis. And one of the latest ones is about whether teens should be using social media. How did this come about?
So this really kicked off last week when the Victorian government came out with a proposal to ban the use of mobile phones within schools effectively during school hours. It's going to become impossible to use a phone in a primary school, and in high schools, the schools will have the option of introducing that. That in itself was a controversial topic that stirred up a lot of discussion, some of it interesting, a lot of it not particularly interesting. But it's led to this broader discussion of, well, how is it that we regulate the access of teens to social media? Because the big reason behind the Victorian policy was, let's try and cut down on the amount of bullying that happens on social media, and phones seem to be an enabler of that. And then this spun off into, basically an opinion column and a tweet from Emma Alberici, the host of Lateline, suggesting that basically we should, at the very least, give teachers the power to inspect kids' phones regularly to see what they're doing on social media, and then coming up with a thing saying, let's just ban everybody under 16 and that will solve the problem. Now, this is quite evidently problematic. So our absent voiced host, Alex Kidman, wrote up a piece on his site about some of the many reasons why this is a bad idea, many of which are pretty obvious. But I mean, Adam, what problems can you see with that sort of approach?
As soon as you said inspect, I think of going through US customs and them wanting me to unlock my phone so they can check if I'm making unpatriotic texts. That's a massive invasion of privacy. Telling them they can't use it at all is one thing. There could then be, health and safety concerns there, but they did allow for the fact if you've got a legitimate medical condition. But to be able to walk up to a kid and say, give me your phone, unlock it, and show me everything you've been saying on Twitter, that's just insane.
I don't understand why a teacher can't just say, put your phone away or you're going to the principal's office.
Yeah, and this is part, in the schools context, this is certainly part of the argument that it is probably possible to enforce saying you're not supposed to be using the phone in this space. It doesn't, of course, totally solve the problem because the chances are these kids are not sitting there device free. They're working on laptops. They've got just as much access to social media on those devices. So, in a school context, you can't get that perfect level of control. Like a lot of these discussions, it's also predicated on the idea that access to these services is a really bad thing. And you can think of all kinds of marginalized groups where actually that's really important. If you're an LGBTQ teen, this might be one of the few ways that you feel you can reach out. And if you're one of those kids and you're going to a religious school and they can say you're going against the ethos of the school, it's just such a massively, obviously damaging issue. So it feels like a thought bubble, but it feels like a lot of the discussion around these issues leads to thought bubbles, and sometimes thought bubbles lead to government policy. And that's why it's worrying to sort of, I guess, for me to see this sort of discussion go on, because it doesn't seem like there's any nuance or any recognition of the fact that there would be other ways of getting around this. If you ban, there's a great recent example, if you ban kids from chatting on social networks, they start chatting to each other in Google Docs because they've got commenting features and discussion. So if you're determined to have those conversations for good or for evil, they're going to happen. And as with most things, saying, oh, I'm going to ban this is, and it sounds like an easy thing to do. It's not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is surely to say, well, we have to address these issues in a wholehearted way. And that's really difficult. Are you going to eliminate bullying? No. Was bullying a problem when we didn't have social media? Yes. So it doesn't add up in my head.
I would be interested to know if they have any actual data to support the argument that stopping kids using their phones during school hours will have a big impact on bullying. Now, I'm only going on my own theories, but I would think that a lot of that bullying would happen outside of school hours. So taking the phone away from them when most of the time they can't be using the phone anyway, I'm not sure how big an impact that has, other than the school making themselves feel like they're doing something.
There's also there's a little bit of evidence on this front because a similar ban came in New York a few years ago and has since been revoked, where they put it in for a few years and then they decided that it was ineffective and it wasn't really having an impact. Now, it would be nice to have more research in that area, but it certainly shows that making this decision does not necessarily lead to those kind of improvements. And you would hope that those examples might have got looked at before you introduce this policy or start trying to extend on it. There's also the brute reality that, in theory, you're not supposed to have a Facebook account before you're 13 anyway. Does that stop people under 13 getting onto Facebook? I don't think so. So, yeah, when there's a ban there, then when you're a teenager, what's more exciting than trying to get around the ban?
I feel that if a teacher can control the classroom, it's something as simple as put your phone away. We know you have the phone. It's pretty clear parents are equipping their kids with phones. Hell, a lot of us are kind of encouraging, or at that point now where it makes a lot of sense.
If your kid is young and is commuting to school every day and you just want to know that they're okay, or maybe the trains are... My son hasn't had access to a smartphone until recently. He's in year 10, but he was doing work experience in the city. Yeah. So he had a phone for the 2 weeks and I knew I could trust him with it. And it was just that I knew he got there okay. And I knew if he was coming home and the trains are out, he could send me a message and I could help him figure out another way to get home. If he had been commuting to school, he would have had a phone much sooner.
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to disagree with both of you on this point, oddly enough. On the commuting point, it just comes down to that, this is a very recent development, the idea that you had to know your kid was going to kind of get there. Schools have phones. Having said that, I don't think Lee's correct either, because the reality is you can say, okay, you say to the kids, right, put away your phones, that's it. 5 of them disagree. That's 5 minutes of your lesson disappear having that argument. When you've only got an hour to teach things, if you have to spend 20 minutes on phone discipline, sometimes it's easy to say, let's get going and interrupt as you go. So I just don't think there's ever an easy way to solve these things.
I mean, as you said before, it's not really an issue with the phone for that. Like, they'll pull out their laptop, they'll talk on Facebook Messenger, they'll talk on other tools. It doesn't really matter.
Google Wave.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yes, hooray. They'll be the ones using it. But the reality is that it's a technology issue, and it's something schools need to adapt to. Maybe it's something as an education lesson. If you're caught using this, it's a one-strike policy. You go to the principal's office. You're absolutely right, Gus, in that you'll waste time in the day. I need to see a teacher's point of view of this, because I haven't been to school in so long, and I don't have a kid old enough. Mine turns 2 in a couple days, so she's definitely not at the age where a phone means anything other than stealing it from me so she can take random selfies of herself.
By the time she goes to school, she'll have an implant. It's going to be a different issue.
I really
Yeah.
look forward to how they ban that one. It's just a matter of just twitching your eye and it switches off. Uh, it doesn't feel like this is the right approach in general because there are so many other tools they could be using. I remember when I was in school and they told us not to use the computer for Quake, the first thing we did was use it for Quake. It's just a thing. Kids are going to find a way around everything. The reality is they're going to be exposed to even more technology than most of us. They're going to find ways to get around it. So all of a sudden suggesting that banning it in the school, it's not going to matter in the long run. They'll have something else. They'll switch to their watch, which has it, or they'll all communicate using some random Bluetooth earpieces that no one can see.
So, in conclusion, this is even less likely to succeed than Google Wave.
Well, folks, that just about wraps up another fine episode of Vertical Hold. What do you think? Is there any merit in putting a Netflix-style tax on the NBN? Should we be banning kids having phones in school? Send us your feedback via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks to Gus for stepping in.
My pleasure.
And thanks to Lee again for joining us on the show.
Always happy to be here, guys. Thanks.
And thanks everyone for listening. As I keep saying, we're on a big push this year to reach more people. So we really appreciate it when you can give us a shout out on social media, jump on your podcasting platform of choice and leave us a review to help spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Casa Systems, taking Australian technology to the global market.
That's pretty.
That's fine.
Honestly, I think we said as much as we could say without getting into stuff where it's going to look horribly like contempt of court. So,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we just skirted the edges of that.
and